The moment my boss told me she had set me up on a blind date, something in my chest tightened in a way I couldn't explain. I remember standing there in the quiet hallway outside her office, holding a stack of reports that suddenly felt heavier than they should have. Her voice had been casual, almost playful, but there was a strange glimmer in her eyes that made me feel like something bigger was happening behind the scenes. I laughed awkwardly and tried to brush it off, assuming she was joking, but she simply smiled and told me the reservation had already been made. That night I would discover that the blind date she had arranged wasn't just unexpected, it would completely change the course of my life. And when I finally walked into that restaurant and saw who was sitting at the table waiting for me, I realized the truth. My boss hadn't just set me up on a blind date. She had set me up with her own daughter. Before we go further into this story, take a moment to support the channel. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the power of unexpected connections that change lives, please like this video, share it with someone who loves emotional stories, leave a comment telling us where you're watching from, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. My name is Andrew Carter, and for the past 4 years I had been working in a small architecture firm in Portland, Oregon. The firm was run by Margaret Collins, a woman known for her sharp instincts, quiet authority, and a reputation for seeing potential in people long before they saw it in themselves. When she first hired me, I was barely holding my life together. My father had passed away the year before, my student loans were suffocating me, and I was struggling to prove myself in a competitive field. Margaret never treated me like just another employee. She pushed me harder than anyone else in the office. But in a strange way, it always felt like she believed in me more than I believed in myself. That Friday afternoon, when she told me about the blind date, I assumed it was one of her rare jokes. Margaret wasn't the kind of person who meddled in personal lives. She was professional, focused, and usually 10 steps ahead of everyone else. But that day she leaned back in her chair and said she thought I worked too much and lived too little. She said a friend of hers knew someone wonderful and that I deserved to meet her. I tried to politely decline, but she waved it off like the decision had already been made. All weekend I kept thinking about it. Part of me felt nervous, another part felt strangely curious. I had spent so many years focusing on work and survival that the idea of going on a blind date felt almost foreign. Still, something about Margaret's confidence made it hard to refuse. If she believed the person was worth meeting, maybe there was a reason. Sunday evening arrived faster than I expected. The restaurant she had chosen was a small Italian place downtown called La Verona, a place known for soft lighting, quiet music, and the kind of atmosphere that made everything feel a little more meaningful. My heart pounded as I walked inside. The hostess led me toward a table near the window, and that was when I saw her. A young woman sat there already waiting, nervously stirring her glass of water. She looked up when she heard my footsteps, and for a moment neither of us spoke. Her name, I would soon learn, was Claire Collins. And yes, she was Margaret Collins's daughter. At first I thought there had been some kind of mistake. My mind raced through every possible explanation, but none of them made sense. Claire looked just as surprised as I felt. She admitted that her mother had told her she should meet someone kind, hardworking, and genuine, but she had no idea the person would be one of her own employees. The awkwardness between us felt almost unbearable in the beginning. I kept wondering if this was some strange test or experiment orchestrated by Margaret. But as the minutes passed, something unexpected happened. Claire began talking about her life in a way that felt completely honest and unfiltered. She told me she worked as a pediatric nurse at a hospital across town. She loved her job, but it was emotionally exhausting. She saw children and families going through the worst moments of their lives every day, and sometimes she struggled to carry that weight home with her. There was a quiet strength in her voice, the kind that comes from someone who has faced heartbreak but still chooses compassion. As we talked, the tension slowly dissolved into something warmer. Claire admitted she had always admired how passionate her mother was about her work, but growing up she often felt like she lived in the shadow of Margaret's success. She had chosen nursing because she wanted a life that focused on people rather than buildings or business deals. The more she spoke, the more I realized something strange. She was nothing like the intimidating image I had always associated with Margaret. Claire was gentle, thoughtful, and full of empathy, and somehow, within the first hour of conversation, it felt like I was talking to someone I had known for years. Still, the situation carried a heavy complication. Dating your boss's daughter was the kind of thing that could easily turn into a disaster. I told Claire honestly that I didn't want her mother to feel like our professional relationship was being taken advantage of. She smiled softly and said her mother had always been a little unconventional. If Margaret believed two people might connect, she wasn't afraid to take a risk. By the time dinner ended, the nervousness that had filled my chest earlier had been replaced by something far more dangerous: hope. When Claire and I stepped outside into the cool evening air, the city lights reflected in the wet pavement from a light rain that had passed earlier. For a moment we both just stood there, unsure how to say goodbye. Then she said something I will never forget. She told me that blind dates were supposed to be uncomfortable and awkward, but somehow this one felt different. Like the beginning of something rather than a random meeting between strangers. Over the next few weeks, Claire and I started seeing each other more often. Coffee after her hospital shifts, walks along the Willamette River, quiet conversations that stretched late into the night. The connection between us grew slowly but steadily, like a story unfolding at exactly the right pace. Of course, eventually we had to face Margaret. The day she called me into her office again, my stomach twisted with anxiety. I expected a serious conversation, maybe even a warning about boundaries. Instead, Margaret simply looked up from her desk with that same knowing expression she had the day she mentioned the blind date. She asked one simple question: "So, how did dinner go?" I hesitated for a moment before telling her the truth. I told her about Claire's kindness, her strength, and the way she made me feel like the world was bigger than deadlines and office walls. Margaret listened quietly without interrupting. Then she smiled. She said she'd spent years watching people build careers but forget to build lives. She had also spent years worrying about Claire finding someone who valued compassion as much as ambition. And when she saw the way I treated people at work, the way I stayed late to help coworkers or volunteered for community projects, she wondered if the two of us might understand each other. In other words, she hadn't been joking that day. She had simply trusted her instincts. Months passed, and what started as an awkward blind date slowly became something deeper. Claire and I learned each other's fears, dreams, and scars. She helped me see a world beyond survival and work. I helped her believe that someone could stand beside her through the emotional storms of her career. One evening almost a year later, we stood together on a quiet hill overlooking the city lights. The air was cool, and the sky was painted with soft colors from the setting sun. As I held her hand, I realized something that once seemed impossible. The blind date my boss arranged had become the most important moment of my life. Before we reach the end of this story, I want to ask you something. If this journey of unexpected love and second chances has touched your heart even a little, please take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who believes in meaningful connections, and subscribe to the channel for more emotional stories like this. And here's a special request for you. Before the ending, comment below with the word hope if you believe life sometimes brings the right people together in the most unexpected ways. 3 years after that night at La Verona, Claire and I stood together again. But this time it wasn't as strangers meeting for the first time. It was as two people who had built a life side by side. Margaret stood in the front row, watching quietly with tears in her eyes as we promised to walk through the future together. Sometimes the moments that change our lives arrive disguised as something simple: a conversation, a coincidence, a blind date arranged by someone who saw a possibility we couldn't see ourselves. And sometimes the person who pushes you toward that moment isn't just your boss, but someone who quietly believes you deserve happiness. If this story moved you, touched your heart, or reminded you that life still holds beautiful surprises, please like, comment,